I mean, quite frankly, he should be sacked for not picking him. Sacked. I would have sacked him the moment the team sheet came out. It's a joke. It's a disgrace. How can he not pick him? And, sorry, what was that? We won the game. Oh, I mean, no, I didn't even watch it, to be honest. The England national team have just beaten Italy 2-1 at Wembley and have secured their place as qualification group winners and will enter Pot 1 at Euro 2024. They have 2 further dead rubbers in the group left to play, Malta and North Macedonia. It's the 9th of November 2023. Gareth Southgate announces his squad, and on the surface it seems innocuous. All the familiar faces are here. Kane, Saka, Foden, Rice and Walker. There's even some lesser seen faces amongst the group. Konza, Rico Lewis, Tomori, Cole Palmer. But none of that matters as English football discourse implodes in on itself and all discussions surround one absent man. Free him, says England legend Rio Ferdinand on his YouTube podcast. Free my guy. I don't know whose nose he's put out of joint. I don't know what happened. Ferdinand stares down the camera as he rants for a solid minute about the exclusion of a player from the England squad to face Malta and North Macedonia. Every single reply to the video, which Ferdinand posted on his own Twitter account, is in total agreement. It's ridiculous. Rio is bang on. Southgate doesn't care. He just calls who he likes. Southgate should be sacked for not picking him. It's bewildering. Just how can you leave him out? No one can seem to understand it. And as one user even surmises, maybe it's racism. Surely that's the only possible explanation here. So, who are we talking about? Jude Bellingham, a 2004 Wayne Rooney, the reincarnation of 1966 Bobby Moore? No, it's just Raheem Sterling. Sterling scored 3 Premier League goals in his first 10 appearances at the start of the 2023-24 season. A decent return, but by no means did he suddenly set the world on fire. Crucially, however, Sterling scored in a couple of consecutive games against Manchester City and Newcastle right around the time of the England squad announcement. This is what had caused all the outrage, all the rants, all the head loss, all the calls for the manager to be sacked, accusations of favouritism, racism and everything in between was down to 5 Premier League goals scored across 13 games between August and the end of November 2023. At the time of writing and since England's international fixtures in November 2023, Raheem Sterling has added 1 more Premier League goal to his tally, giving us a grand total of 6 league goals across 31 league appearances for Chelsea. In recent fixtures, he featured for 17 minutes against Burnley, 19 minutes against Manchester United, and never made it off the bench as Chelsea faced Sheffield United. Of course, no one is talking about Raheem Sterling anymore. Rio Ferdinand, and ultimately not just him, but swathes of fans of the England national team who were once so adamant and so steadfast that he was the man that simply could not be dropped. He was the man that has to be picked, have all fallen silent on the matter. Sterling was not picked for England's international fixtures against Brazil and Belgium in March 2024. Rio Ferdinand did not once tweet about Raheem Sterling. There is an inexplicable but incredibly tangible madness when it comes to the way fans of national teams discuss and evaluate international managers, squad selections and results. Any reasonable logic or sense of nuance that is applied to fan think at a club level is suddenly ejected out of consciousness for the duration of a weekend with no Premier League football, forgotten about, until it comes back. And although it does often feel like the English are the worst for it, it's not just limited to us. Here's the French losing their heads over Deschamps selecting Giroud over Lacazette for games against Gibraltar and Greece in the summer of 2023. You know, that Giroud, the one that's won basically everything at club level, won the World Cup with France after a 2-decade-long wait, and is the fucking all-time top goal scorer for the France national team. Sack Deschamps though, because he's anti-Leon, apparently. At least it's good to see that international head loss isn't just contained to our borders. This might be hard to hear for many, but international squad selection is not a Player of the Month award. It's not simply a selection of all the players who scored the most goals since the last window. It's not simply 26 of the most in-form players a country has available. Recent club form is simply one factor amongst many in building a squad to go on to win a knockout tournament. Form in football is fickle, and players go on good and bad runs of form all the time. I've used Sterling as an example at the start of this video, but I'm sure you can think of many other examples yourselves. The problem with calling up a player who has hit a freak run of form or who has fallen out of one is the limited window in which international managers have to coach their sides. International breaks are fragmented and infrequent, with limited time devoted to the training pitch and tactics. Over the course of a tournament cycle, time spent in these windows can be amalgamated, and real change in playing style and personnel can be achieved. We've seen it ourselves with Southgate's England, going from a 5-3-2 at World Cup 2018 with 2 number 10s behind Harry Kane to a 4-3-3 with more of an emphasis on wing play and overlapping fullbacks, and not even one number 10 at Euro 2020 and Qatar 2022, to a 4-2-3-1 in preparation for Euro 2024 with now an array of English number 10s all fighting for a starting space behind Kane. Vitally, these changes in system and style have to be facilitated slowly over the course of several breaks. Unlike at a club level, where coaches see their players 7 days a week on a training pitch and can work more frequently. We've even seen clubs like Arsenal use a break in club fixtures to fly the whole squad out to Dubai for a concentrated week of warm weather training with no games to implement changes. Arsenal came back from their Dubai break with several tweaks to their first half of the season. Jorginho came in as Arsenal switched to a double pivot with him alongside Rice. The central midfield Kai Havertz experiment was paused and he was moved up front. Rice became a dedicated corner kick taker from the left-hand side, and that's just to name a few. International managers do not have this luxury. Whatever changes are to be implemented must be broken up into brief windows throughout a season. And if the squad is constantly chopping and changing based on player form at club level, you run the risk of players missing out on vital sessions and no one being on the same page. Now, this video is not about trying to defend every single decision Gareth Southgate has made, just wait till next month. But Harry Maguire is a key example of this. No matter what you may think of him, Maguire has been a key part of England's back line since 2018, and alongside Stones, anchored the England defence at Euro 2020. Of course, we all know the story by now. Maguire hit a run of form so terrible that it cost him his reputation, the Manchester United captaincy, a place in the Manchester United squad, and almost his entire career. And throughout all of it, Southgate, amid huge criticism, stuck with him. If you want to argue that Southgate's loyalty stretched too far and for too long, I wouldn't argue back. But importantly, whether you love him or hate him, Maguire has regained his form to some extent at the very least, for his club. With injuries to Martinez and the manager souring on Varane and Lindelof, Harry Maguire is back starting for Manchester United at centre-back. And with the recent European horror shows from Dunk, an injury to Gahey, and the likes of Colwill and Branthwaite hitting patchy form themselves, it's hard to argue that Maguire shouldn't have a place in the England squad. Ultimately, you could argue that the faith placed in Maguire throughout his drop in levels of performance has paid off. Maguire hasn't missed an international window. He hasn't missed a training camp. He's further strengthened his partnership alongside John Stones when the latter has managed to stay fit. It was a risk to stick by him, to gamble on him returning to form, but I'd argue that it's a risk that has paid off. And it's these types of risks that international managers have to make all of the time. And it's these types of risks that the general public seemingly just can't understand. It would have been extremely easy to call up Raheem Sterling in the winter of 2023. He had scored more goals than Rashford and Grealish, and for many, that's justification enough. But Sterling's form has mostly been poor since the World Cup, and a slight uptick in goals at the start of the 2023 season was never a guarantee that he would return to his best, and time has proven that arguably he hasn't. What good is it to call up Sterling for the November window, removing a Grealish or a Rashford for 2 games against Malta and North Macedonia just to drop him for the next window? It's not good for Sterling, it's not good for the players, and it's not good for team cohesion. This intricacy can be seen throughout all international teams, as managers have to weigh up tried and trusted players against players who are in form for their clubs. Just how long do you stick with an underperforming player, gambling on them finding their form again? Just how quickly do you discard one player for another that's in better form at club level? If Southgate had reintegrated Sterling in November 2023, there would have just been calls for his dismissal from the team just months later. Does this mean that international teams should pick 26 players following the start of a new tournament cycle, lock everyone in and call it a day then? Of course not. But discarding a player and calling up another in their place has wider ramifications than it may appear to have on a surface level. Sometimes the decision is obvious. A player is performing so well and so consistently that they just have to be in. But sometimes it's just a winger who scored a couple of goals against Luton and Spurs. And all of this has to be taken in context with the makeup of the team the manager has available to him. Unlike at club level, an international team cannot go out and buy a left back if they have no good ones. They cannot go out and buy a number 8 or sell one of their many in-form centre forwards to raise funds. This is the beauty of international football, the imbalance in player profiles that nations find themselves with and how they navigate it. It's always interesting to see David Alaba rocking up as a number 10 for Austria, even though he spent his career in defence for Real Madrid. Spain have a plethora of technical midfielders, but almost no centre forwards. It will take more than just a brief good run of form to break into the Spain squad if you play in central midfield, but a brief good run of form is probably enough to get you some national team minutes if you're a centre forward, as the competition is just far less. In the same way, it makes sense to call up a 19-year-old Kobbie Mainoo with a total of 20 professional games on his CV, as England have basically no one else who can naturally fill that number 8 role. On the flip side, England have a plethora of talented wide players who consistently perform well at an international level, and if you're an English wide player, it takes more than a good run of form in the league to break in. The timing of each international break and a player's availability to join up with their national team during those specific windows is a huge factor too. As already covered, managers have specific and limited windows to shape a team, separated over the course of a season or two. A player can be good enough, be in form enough, and be available for selection come tournament time, but in certain circumstances there can still be an argument to not select them. With the nature of the way the international fixture schedule works, some windows are going to be huge crunch qualifiers against some of the biggest and best nations in the world, and some are just going to be a weekend of smashing San Marino or Slovenia. If a player is available for San Marino but is unavailable for a big game against a better quality opposition, question marks will remain regarding how high their ceiling at an international level really is. And I think the flip side to this conundrum applies as well. Picture a situation where an international manager wants to try and play a team suited to more expensive and attacking football. Maybe he thinks he can get more out of his squad by playing a certain talent in a different position to where they play at club level, or maybe he believes switching formations might be the best way of getting all of his talent onto the pitch at the same time. However, he still has to win football matches, even when you're outside of a tournament. If you're the manager of a big nation with huge expectations, not only do you need to qualify for the tournament, you must qualify in style and win all the games. Taking any European nation as an example, the time between each tournament will consist of a long, grueling qualification cycle in which some matches will be tense and decisive battles against similar levels of opposition, and some will be ridiculously unbalanced matches against vastly different levels of opposition, where the final result is practically assured before a ball is kicked. If you don't qualify automatically through your group, you'll be kicked into a series of high-profile playoff rounds to contend with. There's a Nations League tournament to navigate, featuring promotion, relegation, and even a semi-final playoff and a final for the best teams at the end. And finally, if there's any room left in the calendar, you may get the odd friendly match. Just where are the chances to experiment and to tinker? There's big, important games of football to win. International managers don't get a pre-season in the same way clubs do, as they jet off to another country to play a series of matches against teams where the results don't matter and the world doesn't watch. Pre-season for international managers consists mostly of must-win games followed by some more must-win games, with the pressure of an entire nation watching. And so, a player being injured or unavailable in the wrong place at the wrong time becomes a risk to any manager who now faces the prospect of throwing them into the side on the eve of a tournament and hoping they swim rather than sink. By the same token, I think this is why, on an international level, a player not making the most of the minutes they are given can see them drop down the pecking order or out of the manager's plans altogether, despite whatever form they are in at club level. It's always funny to me how everyone seems to claim that they hate international football, that it's boring and pointless, and that they aren't bothered by it, because this sentiment is simply not reflected in the amount of backlash, head loss, and ferocious footballing discourse whenever a big nation fails to win a game of football, friendly, qualifier, or otherwise. The England national team not winning a football match guarantees 1 million tweets, 10,000 opinion pieces published across every news outlet known to man, and could launch 1,000 ships. If you're in charge of a national team, every game must be won, or there'll be calls for your head and doubts about your position. And so, if a new player doesn't integrate and perform quickly, just how long can you allow him to continue playing for you until he finds his feet at an international level? Over the past few seasons, William Saliba has quite possibly cemented himself as the best centre-back in all of world football. And yet, Deschamps rarely picks him for France, often opting to go for Konate and a revolving door of faces in Lucas Hernandez, Kounde, Todibo and Upamecano over him. Because when Saliba has played for France, he's had some tough moments, which have failed to instill confidence. Deschamps has even stated this himself clear as day. Quote, "He is having a good season, but he also does things that I don't like so much. For France, he has limited game time, but when he plays, that hasn't necessarily gone well. The hierarchy doesn't favour him at the moment. With certain players, I make sure to persevere because it can be confidence or little blockages that can shift. Some don't have any concerns, some need game time. William has had less game time, so that doesn't allow him to be very calm. While Arsenal fans would find this rhetoric increasingly difficult to get their heads around, Deschamps is literally saying here that he simply has to win the games, and he feels that the evidence so far suggests that playing Saliba doesn't help him do that, and he can't keep playing him until he finds his form, as France cannot be seen losing a football match. As quoted, the question becomes how long he perseveres with Saliba's bad run of form at international level, how much is there to gain if he finds some, and how badly do France lose out if he doesn't. These types of decisions are unique to international football and aren't always applicable in the club game. Saliba has a large body of work for his club. If he has a bad game, Arteta can be confident that it's not a representation of his overall ability. Even if he has several bad games, who's going to come in for him anyway? Tomiyasu? Kiwior? Is that really any improvement? But on the international stage, France are stacked at the heart of central defence, and a variety of options are knocking at the door. When building a team to compete at club level, a squad must be assembled that can compete on all fronts. The best teams are the ones built with a 38 or so games long domestic league in mind, and all the nuance and decision making that entails. The season is long and hard. Players will get injured, some for small periods, some won't be seen at all. Players will start brightly and then burn out. Others will be afterthoughts who become mainstays by the end of the campaign. Teams need to fight across up to 3 knockout competitions alongside the league. A squad needs like-for-like replacements. It needs game changers. It needs youth and energy, but also experience and wisdom. It needs versatility and players who are versatile. It needs to be built to handle the unexpected. Contrastingly, international teams need to not lose 7 games in the middle of the summer. That's it. That's all there is to it. What I find is often lost from the circus surrounding national teams is that the makeup of the squad is fundamentally different to a club squad because the nature of the competition is different. At World Cup 2022, squad sizes remained at the expanded 26 following on from Euro 2020. World Cup winners Argentina featured 9 players that featured for less than an hour across the tournament. The same could be said for the Netherlands. 9 out of 26 featured for less than 60 minutes. Croatia, this number was 7. Portugal, this number was 5. You may be able to take 26 different players to a tournament, but aside from a third place playoff game or a dead rubber group match, you won't be able to play all of them. A tournament side is about 16 or 17 actual difference makers, with the rest making up the numbers and filling in emergency situations. Which means once you have your core settled group, the ones you can trust, the ones you believe you can rely on, the rest simply need to be made up of good people who work hard and don't disrupt the camp even if they don't play. You need to keep a tight dressing room focused and settled for 6 weeks. You need players that are happy to train hard while knowing that they aren't going to see the pitch, and you need players that are good leaders and good characters. When thinking about it this way, it can start to explain certain call-ups that seem unthinkable to those on the outside. Every national team seems to have a player, or even a few, that have been around the squad for longer than their sell-by date would suggest. Normally always older players, players with experience, and players who are seen by their international coaches as leaders and good characters in the dressing room. For England, this role is controversially filled by Jordan Henderson, who has become the pantomime villain of the nation and is an easy target for a series of fans who love buying a ticket to a football match just to boo their own players. Saudi Arabia nonsense aside, while many fans probably quite rightly see Henderson as over the hill, past his peak, and not good enough any longer for the national side, the England setup clearly sees value in him beyond his actions on the pitch. In fact, for all the noise around Jordan Henderson, he rarely actually plays games for England and mostly only appears in the last 10 or 20 minutes of games to see out a lead, or in recent times hasn't seen any action on the pitch at all. International coaches understand that all 26 members of the squad won't be difference makers, and there is room for a pick or maybe two that benefit a group outside of match days. England players consistently talk about Henderson being someone they look up to. New debutants always mention how Henderson helps guide them through their first few camps. Jude Bellingham has gone on record to describe him as a role model. Now, the argument often touted is that none of this really matters. A player like Henderson being included in the squad blocks another English central midfielder who deserves it more based on club level form, and it's unfair for them to miss out over a glorified cheerleader, as one may describe him. But there's that word again, deserves. You'd be right in saying that if you were to pick a 26-man squad based only off which national team players are most in form at club level, then Henderson wouldn't make the cut. But, as I outlined earlier, an international squad is not a collection of the most in-form 26 players a nation has. There is no deserving. A call-up is not necessarily an unequivocal reflection or representation of your ability or levels of performance, even if that does take some effort to get your head around. And it's not just England. An international manager valuing experience and leadership in the camp can be seen all over, and there's examples of the Jordan Henderson effect across all of international football. 38-year-old Jesus Navas still makes the Spain squad. 37-year-old Giroud still plays for France. 34-year-old Thomas Müller is still playing for Germany. Call it favouritism, call it bias. International managers call it essential. In conclusion, despite the brush they are often painted with, international managers aren't stupid. The way people talk about those who manage some of the biggest national sides in the world baffles me, even forgetting about England for now. There is a substantial number of French fans that want World Cup winning Deschamps to leave. Luis Enrique, a proven winner at club level, has already been hounded out of the Spain job. Hansi Flick won the treble with Bayern and has already lost his job with the German national side. Mancini won Euro 2020 with Italy and he's now gone. Fernando Santos won Portugal their first major international honour in their history. He was sacked and he is still hated and seen as a joke by most of the footballing world. Roberto Martinez had fantastic results with Belgium, who couldn't quite get past the best team in the world in France at the 2018 World Cup, and is now seen as a joke and a terrible manager who wasted a generation. And yes, Gareth Southgate is objectively the second best England manager of all time, with the best win rate out of any England manager to manage more than 50 games, and most of the country hates him for it. Apart from, I don't know, possibly Argentina, does anyone like the manager of their international side? It simply can't be true that all of these managers are bad, hack frauds that have somehow lucked their way into top jobs, and for some of them, lucked their way into winning some of the biggest prizes in the sport. Look, I'm not trying to say that all international managers are flawless saints. undeserving of any criticism and incapable of making mistakes or doing a poor job. Oh, won't someone think of the international managers? But what I am trying to say is that the discourse surrounding international football, and especially international management, is completely broken, steeped in club tribalism, and lacking nuance. The club game, featuring the best players, the best coaches, and the highest level of football, all while being entrenched in people's culture, communities, and livelihoods, means that it rightly stands as the most important part of the sport to most people, and that's perfectly understandable. What is harder to understand is the things fans demand of their national sides that they would never demand of their club sides. Imagine if, for some reason, the club you support already had 5 or 6 fantastic options on the wings, but were incredibly light at the base of midfield. Fans wouldn't demand the club to sell one of their few midfield options to fund the purchase of yet another forward that they don't need. Even the least invested fan can understand the basics of player profiles and the need for attribute balance across a team. And yet, the amount of people I've seen moan that Henderson or Maguire gets a call up over Morgan Gibbs-White or Harvey Elliott or Solanke is outstanding. May as well be arguing for apples over oranges. I'm convinced that the vast majority of the footballing zeitgeist and fan culture understands that players have a variety of skill sets and that using a mixture of those skill sets effectively in a system is what makes teams tick. Even if you hate Jack Grealish or think he's rubbish or whatever, I think everyone can understand what he brings over Jeremy Doku. Grealish is a controller. He slows the play down, he helps his team up the pitch, and he's better in possession. And a player like Doku is a dribbler, more susceptible to lose the ball, but more direct in wanting to make things happen. And I think everyone can understand why in some games Pep chooses Grealish and in some games Pep chooses Doku. Yet, at a national level, it just feels like all of this thinking never even enters people's minds. There's never a question of why Deschamps feels France play better when they field Giroud, who can dominate in the air, hold the ball up, and link the play with the wide men. Instead, fan culture seems to just run a simple proposal of who has the most league goals. Well, it's Lacazette, so he must be picked regardless. It's baffling. England have lots of technical playmakers who love to cut inside and operate in the middle of the pitch, but would the team really work if you played all of them at once, wedged all of them into positions that they don't play at club level to fit them all in? Even if you did, who's going to hold the width? Who's going to stretch defences or make the runs in behind? How do these players combine with their corresponding fullbacks or inside central midfielders? To many, none of these questions seem to matter. Just look through the goals and assists table at the end of the season and just pick all of the names at the top. There's the team. Ultimately, the reality of international football is that it's a unique equation. That is precisely why it can be fascinating. Think of it as a totally different sport if you have to. International teams have to be coached in fragmented sessions over the course of 2 years with the aim of not losing 7 games in the summer. That's it. And when you look at it through that lens, not only is it extremely interesting to analyse, but it also starts to answer some of the questions and starts to explain the many cliches international management always seems to entail, no matter what nation we're talking about. International call-ups are not Domestic League Player of the Month awards, and simply picking the 26 most informed players on the eve of the tournament is not indicative of what makes a good international side. We all know it doesn't work like that at club level, so why do we expect it to internationally? Just imagine if we had an elite manager in charge of the national team. We'd win everything. Someone like Fabio Capello, who won everything in Spain and in Italy, but obviously not him, he was rubbish for England. But like Hansi Flick, who won everything at Bayern Munich, but obviously not Hansi Flick because he was rubbish for Germany. I'm thinking of someone like Luis Enrique, who won the treble with Barcelona, one of the best teams in the history of football, but not Luis Enrique per se because he was rubbish with Spain, wasn't he?